Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Nick Lugo Show, where I study the tactics, practices, and principles of some of my favorite achievers. Today, you'll experience Angela Mulrooney, an expert in the idea of branding and brand archetypes. Over her life, she's built 5 personal brands, as well as started her own brand, Unleashing Influence, a company that is dedicated to helping other people, influencers, as well as businesses, create their own brands and create their own structure. The idea of archetypes is something that's incredibly interesting to me. And well, I created an entire lecture series about this idea of archetypes with Carl Jung, Jordan Peterson, and things of that sort. But it's really interesting how it relates to branding and marketing and things of that sort. It's really cool that you could take something like the complex person that you are and put it into a personal brand, a business brand, or just an identity, taking your complex nature and just putting it together into, well, this is who I am. And well, this is something that's really cool. She has a test on her website, Angela Mulrooney. I think it's unleashinginfluence.com, but that will be in the link in the description below, of you could figure out your own personal brand. And I really love that. I think that's really, really cool. So definitely take the test using the link in the description below. Well, without further ado, here's Angela Mulrooney. The first question I really want to ask you, and this is just, Angela Mulrooney 101, which is, what are brand archetypes and how could we use these to sort of, achieve our goals? We'll keep it nice and general.
So there's 12 main archetypes, but they each have 5 sub-archetypes. There's actually a total of 60 that apply to the business world. And what they are really just general characteristics that we see throughout stories and different cultures. We see them in mythology. We see them playing out in our regular lives. And I know we don't like to be classified into a box, but they kind of put us into a box of understanding, which helps us to, relate to the companies that we want to work for. It helps us to build brands that we want to humanize so the world understands it. And it really does help you to develop a through line with everything that you're doing, from your sales calls to your job interviews to how you're building your brand out there, how you're communicating it in your marketing.
Yeah, so that's the thing that really helped me understand this in a real basic sense. It's simplifying you. Right. So you are a complex person. There are so many different interests and passions and all of these things that go on with you. But when you present yourself to the world, people can't really understand that. You're just too much and you're way too complex. And having this sort of brand archetype in personal branding, right, when introducing yourself to a stranger or in a business brand, really allows for people to sort of get you in pieces. And, it gives them that little initial, okay, this is the basic, Angela Mulrooney. This is the basic Nick Lugo. Then I could, dig a little bit deeper. Maybe he's a little more complex than I thought. So sort of take me through, especially because my podcast listeners are young and I'm young. What are sort of the archetypes for young people that, that allow for them to really show off their maybe energy or passions, or, well, what are all the archetypes for young people?
So the archetypes actually aren't based on age. They're not based on gender. They're not based on location. They're not based on culture. They are really, truly universal. So with the archetypes, there isn't like a set that would apply to young people or older people or middle-aged people. You really just find yourself within the archetype, and then you find a way to express it. So for example, my archetype is rebel. That's my main one. And then I have a bit of magician in me as well, because I transform people's worlds. But with the rebel, it's not about like breaking the rules and all this kind of stuff. For some people it is. But for me, I'm one of those people who holds a mirror up to the world and is like, we can do this differently. We can do this easier. Just because we've always done it this way doesn't mean that we have to keep going this way. And so it was funny once I understood what my archetype was, and my eyes got open to this about 2 years ago. I was like, oh yeah, throughout my life, I can see exactly how that was me. So it's not something that you're trying to contrive. It's not something that you're trying to put on for the world. What you're really doing is just understanding who you are, and then being able to communicate that to the world in a way that is easy for people to understand, if that makes sense.
No, it makes a ton of sense. It's really weird. So I obviously know all the 12 archetypes, and we could go through them in a little bit, but I, this morning actually came to such a realization, like it was such a strong realization that I fit in with it wasn't necessarily an archetype, like one of the 12, but it was just an identity, right? It really gave me a strong identity. I realized that I am an artist. Right. So although it's not a typical archetype, I'm very focused on just creative achievement and just doing the best that I can. I'm not really focused, before I kind of thought I was an entrepreneur where I would say, okay, you know what, like those 12-year-olds that make, lemonade stands and things of that sort. And I thought I was like that because I always started these businesses and doing all these things. But I realized that at the end of the day, I never really wanted to do them to make profit. I never started a lemonade stand. I wrote a book on how to help, my friends and family with their addictions. And all of these things were essentially passion projects. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I did was study Carl Jung and the archetypes and all those things. That's why I'm so interested in this. But I realized that all the things that I do were passion projects. And at the end of the day, all I'm doing is creating art, coming up with new things. And I'm not really focused on creating value for other people. I'm more focused on just pursuing whatever my passion brings me, sort of like what an artist does. So right. I must say, when you find, and the whole point of that was when you find that identity, it's so empowering because it sort of brings everything into alignment. Instead of seeing yourself as this highly complex being sort of feeling lost, you get to sort of frame your interest in one sort of way. And it really allows you to get a little sense of clarity.
For sure. And what I find is a lot of people, they're like, oh, I get who I am. And they put all these different things out there because they're trying to showcase all these different facets of themselves, but there's no through line of how those all fit together. And that's where the archetyping really starts to put those pieces together. Because yes, you may be talented at art, you may be talented at entrepreneurship, you may be talented at science, you may be talented at architecture, but how do you actually make all those things relate so that people don't think you're a flake? And that was my problem too. When I first lost my career in dentistry, I had to figure out who I was. And I'm like, well, I am an artist because I was a professional dancer. So I built my professional dance company. And then I was like, well, I should still use my education because I spent a lot of time studying and put a lot of money into becoming a dentist and then honing that craft. So I'm like, okay, how do I use that? So then I built my business coaching company for dentists. And then I built the social media company. And people were like, you're doing all these things. You have these 3 companies that are all really, they're prosperous. They're taking off. They're very successful. But how does that, like, how are you doing all those things? And it wasn't until I figured out the connection between all of them, which was the Rebel brand, as well as, the movement ties into how I present on camera and how I teach people on camera, which links to the business side of things. Then it started to make sense. But before, people were like I had one business coach who actually wasn't going to work with me because he's like, I just think you're a flake. He's like, you can't be going off and competing internationally and running a successful business and blah, blah, blah. Until he got to know me, and he was like, yes, you actually can, but most people can't. So he couldn't understand because it wasn't from, I hadn't built that through line for him to understand how I did all those things. So I was just like, here's my laundry list of everything that I do. And so it was very confusing, and it did a lot of harm to my personal brand, more than it did good, until I figured all that out.
Yeah, so that's the thing that I actually wrote this down, and I think you hit it perfectly. It's why you need to focus on one brand. So you had those 3 brands. You ended up bringing it into one. And the reason why, and I think this is so strong, is the reason why you should focus on one brand is so that you could have one value provided to people, so people can understand the value that you provide. And then also you have one identity. Right. So when you had those 3 brands, your identity was scattered across those 3 brands, and there was nothing that really brought them together. So explain, sort of how you brought that together. And did it require, I'm pretty sure it did. It required you getting rid of the other 2 brands.
Yes. So when the pandemic hit, the Unleashing Influence company just took off. We went from 2.5 to 14 full-time team members in 10 months.
Wow.
And then I made the decision a month later to move to Nicaragua and just come and start exploring and being a digital nomad. And once I got down here, I was like, what have I done with my life? Like, I'm working 100 hours a week, and I've been working 100 hours a week for the last 2 years. It's insane. I'm in paradise and I can't even enjoy it. And so that started to open my mind to the fact that I was like, I've screwed up here. I've built this empire and I hate it. And so then I started to divest. So I sold off the dance company, and then the agency part of Unleashing Influence, which was all those team members, I sold that off. That was actually my 41st birthday present to myself. And then this fall, September 30th, I sold Unleashing Dentistry's Potential off. So I could just narrow down into what I did best. And I pulled the best of each of those companies into Unleashing Influence for me to provide the services that I do, teaching media mastery. But I think I actually needed to build all those other brands too, to really have that realization that I hated what I had done, but it allowed me to take the best of everything and pull it into that one brand.
Yeah, so that's the thing. So I have a very similar problem where, yes, like I came into about 4 months ago, I had 5 projects that I was working on, and yes, putting in the crazy hours and doing all of these crazy things. It was just way too much. So give us sort of the freedom or the explanation as to what this freedom does by liberating yourself, by only choosing one thing and not really encumbering yourself with all these brands. What freedom comes with it?
First thing is not waking up in the middle of the night going, oh, did I forget to do something, or did my team forget to do something? So that mental release has been amazing. But it's also allowed me to just look through one lens on the things that I'm doing and be able to focus on that and be like, okay, I want to learn more about this because this is going to help. I can learn more about this and pull that in, and it's going to help. And so it's allowed me to narrow the focus of what I want to study more of, which has been nice because, yeah, with those 3 disparate brands, I was having to study for each of those 3 brands and try and pull it in. And I was good at what I was doing, but I wasn't going to be great. And that was one of the big realizations too, is I want to be great at this. I want to make my mark on the world and make a difference in these people's lives. And I can't do that if I'm just kind of just doing a good job. It was a high level good job, but it wasn't my very, very best. And I wanted to realize that full potential. So it really helped me to streamline my focus. It allowed me to streamline my offering and also go into conversations where I was easier to understand what I was bringing to the table, because they're like, okay, yeah, this is the one thing that you put out there on social media. So now it makes sense as to why we're having this conversation.
Exactly. Yeah. So you have one identity. But, let me definitely give you the opposite perspective, because it's something that I've been going with for the last, I guess 2 years, is that, choosing one thing and focusing on it. The problem with that is that energy kind of dies, like the fact that you could pursue novel things every single day to keep switching from task to task, it gives you more energy, like if you do the same thing for 10 hours versus 5 different things across that 10-hour period, you're just going to have more energy. So what would sort of be the argument against that? I have a bunch of arguments against it in my head, but I would definitely like to think of what are the things that sort of that come to your mind about why that idea is kind of wrong.
Well, I think entrepreneurs are just naturally built to seek out new.
Mm-hmm.
It is an addiction. It's like, oh, here's the next best thing. Oh, there's potential to go after this project. So we're always switching into different things. But when you look at the companies who are really, really successful, they did hone in on one thing first and then diversified. They weren't diversified and then honed in. Some of them have gone the same kind of path as I have, but the ones who really focused in on one thing and were masterful at one thing, they were able to build out the credibility to have that diversity when they moved forward. And it is, I understand the desire for the new. And it is exciting to be like, oh, I'm so good at this, and I'm so good at this, and I'm so good at that, right? And it is an ego boost to be able to be multi-talented.
Yeah.
But it does pull there's only so many hours in a day. There's only so much energy. So you're pulled in all these different directions. And the mental task switching is exhausting as well. So it seems like it's beneficial, but when you take a step back and look at if you focused on one thing versus doing, say, 10 different things, it does make a massive difference in how you can move forward.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things that I really notice in my life. Like when you think of the people that I really love, the people that are super successful, in my opinion, or I guess my heroes are, Tim Ferriss, Tony Robbins, Jordan Peterson, those type of guys. I'm sure you've heard of them. And the things about them is in the beginning, if you look at all of them, they had something that went along with their name, just a 2-word tagline. So like you think of like Tim Ferriss, he was that 4-hour work week guy. And Tony Robbins, he was that motivational speaker guy. And all of them had this tiny little identity that came with them, which in some degree is restricting, right? Because it's so annoying, right? Like Tim Ferriss is not only that 4-hour work week guy, he's so much more. But when he was able to do that and become really the best at it, I thought, well, now Tim Ferriss is known as Tim Ferriss and Tony Robbins is known as Tony Robbins, right? So I think it's really, really great to see that. Yeah, like it actually works in the real world. People, even though Tim Ferriss was so much more, he just constricted himself in that way and then brought it himself. Another thing that I thought was really interesting, it was a book I read a while ago. Oh, yes. It was in Willpower Doesn't Work. One of the things that I noticed is that, you know, in that book, they said it's better to pick one path and take 4 steps forward than to pick 4 steps and take 1 step forward each. And I think that it's so true, right? Like you said, the difference of being good versus being great. It's so good, or I guess it's so great to pursue one thing and become great at it. But if you just stay, good at a bunch of different things, then the people who specialize are going to beat you in each of those 4 things. And unfortunately, I came to that realization when I specialized.
Yeah. And well, the thing is, if you are pursuing that one path, it doesn't mean you're going to get bored. You can let yourself get bored, but there's always new things to be discovering. And when I talk to clients, I'm always like, well, where do you want to go? Because I'm like, you're probably not finished with what you're doing right now. There's more that you want to achieve. So it's like, let's map out those things you want to achieve so that we keep you stimulated to stay on this path. Otherwise, there's going to be a sparkly, shiny thing over here that you're like, oh, I should chase that as well. Right. And that's what pulls us off track. But we have that, again, that addiction to the new and the potential that is out there that allows us to split our focus. And we really shouldn't. But if we can find that new shiny thing within what we're trying to achieve in the world, that helps us to stay on track and become that person who is the only option for our clients.
Yeah. And that's a weird concept, isn't it? Like constraints will set you free.
Yeah.
Right. I was thinking about that because, like for me, right, I decided I didn't really like the culture that I was in when I was, the one that I was raised in. It just, I didn't like the conformity. Like my parents, my culture wanted me to become an accountant, finance major, and operate within these strict bounds. And I was just like, nah, I'm not a fan of it. And what I realized is, well, I ended up with a muddled identity as a result, and a lot of my friends, they're all really secure and they followed the culture and they were able to work within the culture and they were able to develop their identity with this nice little, we'll say, shelter of yes, like I know exactly what career I'm going to go into. I know what kind of personality I'm going to be as a result. And they don't really feel lost. They don't really have that existential dread. But for me, because I rejected that culture, because I decided, okay, I'm not going to go by these strict bounds. I'm not going to have this shelter. I was completely lost. And man, it's tough. Like I know a lot of people feel that, whenever you decide to reject anything, then you have to accept the chaos that comes with it. And man, right. Like it's a difficult journey to undertake, but I think it's something worthwhile.
Yeah. And I feel with the generation coming up, like when I look at my parents' generation, it was like you become a police officer or a nurse or a teacher, or, there was kind of a set list of those professions that you go into. And then my generation, there was an opening, like if you did a biology degree, that opened up a whole bunch of different things. And now the new generation coming up is like, well, you don't even have to follow any of those traditional paths. You can completely make your own path.
Yep.
And so I think there's a lot of ways that it is distracting as well, because you don't have those clear paths that are like, I'm going to become this, I'm going to become that, I'm going to become that, because, you're following your parents' footsteps or what is expected of your culture or your society. And so those extra options are making it harder for people to pick where they want to be. And so we see a lot of jack of all trading happening, and people aren't necessarily trusting jack of all trades. They want someone who is passionate and dedicated to their craft.
Yeah. So, that's why I think that's a perfect transition into brand archetypes, because when you think of archetypes, what are they but a simplification of a complex person, right? Like to some degree, we are all 12 of the archetypes, right? I am not only a rebel, but I'm a sage and I have all these different things going on for me. But at the same time, it's definitely good to specialize on one. So definitely, if you know them all off the top of your head, that's very impressive. If you can list all 12 of the archetypes, and then we'll sort of work from there and try to dig a little deeper into a few.
Sure. So the one that is the most simplistic is the innocent. And I call it simplistic because they're more like the childlike. They're looking for paradise on earth. They are the ones who want to find the simplest way to present things. They use simple ingredients. They're very optimistic about what is happening in the world, right? And for a rebel, we're usually like, what is wrong with you? This isn't the reality of what's going on. So there can be that polarity. But there's times where I pull innocent into what I'm doing as well because of the situation, right? And so, as you said, like we navigate between all these different archetypes, which is really interesting that we can pull those things in, but we do need to focus on that dominant. Do you actually want me to go through all the archetypes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you don't have to like explain all them, but just list them all out and then we'll dig deeper into them.
Sure. Next one, lover. So that one is the people who are trying to develop relationship. Then we have, let's go with rebel, magician, hero. Those three are all ones who are trying to leave their mark on the world. The people who are trying to find, utopia on Earth, that includes, sorry, I'll go back to innocent there. We also have our explorer and drawing a blank on that one.
I got it.
Yeah. And then we've got another category of people are the people who create order in the world. So we've got the caregivers, we've got the creators, and we've got the ruler, a big part of that. And then the last grouping would be the people who create connections. So again, lover was there, the everyman or every girl, so girl or guy next door, and then also the jester or the clown. They're the ones who liven up life.
Nice. So the one that you missed was the explorer spirituality part, which is
Sage.
innocent, explorer, and sage.
There we go.
There we go. So yeah, I mean, I think like when I read this, the reason why I wanted you to list all of them out was just because, a few of them really stood out to me, right? Personally. And yeah, like I'm sure that somebody's listening to this and like, oh yes, I'm definitely a creator or I'm definitely a lover. But I definitely wanted to dig into a few of them because I thought some of them were really interesting. The reason why I asked you in the beginning why some of them are tied to specific ages is because in my heart of hearts, like I know that I'm a sage. Like I know that when I'm 67 years old, like I'll be like spitting out prophetic wisdom and things of that sort. But, when you think of a sage, you usually think of someone who's older, who's a little bit more experienced. And well, when you think of a sage, first of all, do you have any examples of sages and what are sort of the characteristics that go with the sage?
So the sage is usually wise, they're knowledgeable, they're usually research based as well. So let's talk about, we've got like IBM versus Apple. So IBM, if you think about Bill Gates, he's considered to be a sage. So he's one of those people who kind of slow and steady. He's not jumping into creating the most innovative thing. He's creating something that is functional and works really well and is tried and true and very proven, right? And the people who tend to follow that are in that sage category. And it's funny because I'm going to give you a real life example of that conflict of a sage being someone who's young. My boyfriend, he's mid 40s, and there's this young guy in Nicaragua who's late 20s, and he's creating this men's group about spirituality. Mm-hmm. And my boyfriend's like, he is having this conflict. He knows this guy, like knows his stuff, but he's like, he's so much younger than me. How can he have that wisdom, right? But if you've put in the time to study it and whatnot, you can be that sage. You are going to have a bit of a prejudice against you if you are young and you don't have that many wrinkles and you don't have white or gray streaks in your hair, because people assume that it takes a long time to get wisdom. But there's people who have that inherent wisdom. We see children who have that inherent wisdom. They're like little old souls. And those are people who can be sages from a young age, but they do have to spend more time proving themselves versus the person who has the aged look, helping to support that they actually are a sage.
Yeah, it makes sense because, when you think about it, right, an archetype is, yes, like it's a mold, right? So obviously someone who's older fits the mold, and the people who, look like me, unfortunately do not have that sort of, archetypal thing going their way. Another one I definitely want to look into, and I think this one really had a strong impact on me was the, actually there are two. Okay, you're a magician. So explain to me magician, because I think that's a little bit mystical and it's meant to be mystical, but I definitely want a nice little concrete explanation of it.
What I like about the magician archetype is it is about transformation. So whether it's transforming how someone's mindset goes from blocked to open to the world, it's asking them the question that suddenly they have these massive realizations about what they can do and their potential. That's what I really like about the magician archetypes, is they're really helping the world to be like, this didn't even seem possible, and you suddenly made it happen. Disney is one of those big examples of the magician, but for a lot of people, they're like, oh, I don't quite relate to that because, that's like a childhood thing, right?
Yeah.
But when you see people who sometimes they're more in the yoga and spirituality side of things, magicians. So they have that kind of woo-woo feel to them. That can be very classical magician, but for the people who are in the business side of things, when they see someone who can help move mountains, they can help to get someone to where they want to go so much faster than someone ever imagined. That fits into the magician archetype as well.
Interesting. So is that why, so sort of explain why you would consider yourself a magician. I assume that's along that lines.
Yeah. So I always start with the rebel part, which is the mirror. I'm like, look at what you're doing. It's not working. And then it's like, once they have that realization, they're open to that, then I help them to move very quickly into where they need to be. So they go from this person who's stuck and then transform them into this person who's very open to the world. They're very open to how they can help people, and they're willing to put themselves out there. And that's one of the biggest transformations is I have these people who are very, very intelligent. A lot of them are really sages because they have that knowledge, they have that expertise behind them, even if they're young, but they aren't willing to put themselves out there because they don't think anyone's going to listen to them. So giving them that confidence to actually get out there is a lot of the magician work that I do.
Interesting. Okay. So now that's definitely a great point to pivot. So you definitely work with a lot of influencers or people trying to be influencers and things of that sort. So what are the main problems that they sort of experience as they're going into brand archetyping and figuring out really what they are and then how to market it?
Well, the biggest thing is they know they're very intelligent. Like, I'm not working with influencers who are pushing products. I'm working with influencers who are thought leaders. So they have this amazing knowledge that the world really does need to know about. And they're stuck because they haven't been willing to put themselves out there. They're not willing to showcase what they are doing because they don't want to be narcissistic. And so they get really stuck in that. And so when we start talking about the archetype and they're like, oh, but if I say it like that, am I going to be appearing narcissistic, or am I going to be appearing self-serving? And so we have to really look at their mindset and look at how they want to serve the world, and then frame how they're putting their content out there in, this is exactly how you're serving the world. So it's not about, look at me, I'm amazing, right? You're sharing your knowledge with the world. You're helping to take people from a place of being stuck to giving them these little tools along the way. And then once they realize, I can only do this to a certain extent based on this content, then they come forward and want to work with that person. But the people, they really do get stuck thinking that I shouldn't be putting this stuff out there. I'm going to appear like a jerk, like the other people I've seen out there that I'm like, I watch their content and go, ooh, I would never want to do that. And so they have to really get over themselves and be willing to put themselves out there, put their ego behind, because that it is ego. They're afraid to look bad. And so that really is a hindrance to them when they actually start doing the work.
That's really interesting because I struggle with that a little bit, right? With the narcissistic, like I want to avoid feeling narcissistic, and I've never really thought about that, I guess. So it's sort of, what is, you definitely explained really well what the internal conflict is there, but what type of person, I guess, is the one who's narcissistic? I guess you're dealing with a lot of people who are trying to be sages, right? People, when you say thought leaders, people who are really, really knowledgeable, but really struggle in putting that knowledge out there. So what kind of, go a little bit deeper into what you mean by narcissistic and that sort of internal conflict?
Sure. So the people who are concerned about being narcissistic usually aren't going to come across as narcissistic, right? Because they have that awareness and they have that idea that they don't want to do that. But what we see is often in the lover archetype that we do find that narcissism, because one of the big parts of lover is actually hedonism, right? Mm-hmm. And so they want to be sensual, they want to be beautiful, they want to come across as perfect all the time. And so those ones often come across narcissistic because it is about presenting themselves in their best light instead of making it about their audience. But when people are worried about the narcissism, we have to step back and be like, okay, well, how are we going to talk about this? We're not going to be like, I've done this, I'm the best at this, the I part of it. Mm-hmm. You start talking about like, this is the knowledge that I have, here's how you can use it. So you can talk about it in the I perspective. And a lot of people do at first because that's the easy way to talk about things. But once they can turn it around and start doing it as almost like a teaching method, then it starts to take the narcissism out of it. And, the people who are a bit more hedonistic about things and they're trying to showcase that sensuality, that's part of their archetype. They're going to attract the right people to it. So it's not a bad thing. It may give me the ick, it may give other people the ick as well, but I'm not their right audience. I'm not the right person to work with them. So that's a good thing. And this is part of the archetypes too, is it allows you to polarize your audience, right? You're going to have people who are attracted and relate to who you are and how you represent yourself to the world. And you're going to have people who are repelled by it. And you don't want to focus on the people, your haters, because they're repelled by what you're doing. You want to focus on those people who are attracted and keep leaning into who you are so you attract more of those right people.
Interesting. So you're saying that sort of along this process, while you get people that like you, you're going to have to get people that don't like you.
Yeah. And if you try to walk the line of getting everyone to like you, you're not being true to yourself.
Interesting. So yesterday I was at this event. It was Hassan Minhaj. Do you know Hassan Minhaj?
Mm-mm.
So Hassan Minhaj, he's hosted The Daily Show, was on on the same TV network as Jon Stewart. I don't know exactly what network it is, but he made a Netflix show called The Patriot Act. Very, very popular. And okay. one of the comedy / politics. He's sort of in that realm. And he presented in front of, us at IU, Indiana University, which was like 1,000 people. And he was very polarizing. Like, he not politically, he didn't really talk about that many political things, but he made jokes and he was brutally honest. And somebody asked a bad question and he said, "That's a bad question." And like everybody,
there's supposed to be no bad questions. Isn't that
right. Exactly. Right. Like he was just so brutally honest. And I don't know, like, so one person actually stood up at the end. He was taking like questions from the audience, and one person stands up. She goes, "Why would you talk to him like that? Like, what are you doing to talking about that guy about the bad question?" And clearly, like he's in an audience where he's trying to please the audience, but he has people inside of the audience that are dissatisfied with the presentation. Like that blew me away. But at the same time, so many people I'm walking out and they're saying they loved it and they thought it was incredible. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. And I find the people, like I've worked with clients who, they have an accent or they're from a part of the country that they said that works against them. And I'm like, but when we look at your audience, you attract people from that region. So why would we be hiding that accent? Why would we be hiding your history of who you actually are and where you came from, right? That's actually your strength, because you're going to find your people who relate to that. If you're trying to go after something that you're not, eventually you're going to misstep at some point, and there's going to be a hole in your story. There's going to be a hole in how you're presenting yourself to the world, and then people aren't going to trust you. So it's better to own. You don't have to showcase everything about who you are and what you do, but be true. What you are showcasing, be true to exactly where you've been, who you are, what you're doing, where you're at in your career and your life, because it's going to serve you better than trying to manipulate your past. And if you're trying to keep track of who you're supposed to be in this scenario or what your history was that you told this person, you're going to screw up at some point. And so if you can just lean into the honesty of who you are, it works so much better. And again, you're going to have the lovers, you're going to have the haters, and that is totally okay. You're going to have to develop rhinoceros skin and just get used to it. But you're going to attract more of the people who love you, which is a great thing. And then you just focus on them and you start to turn a blind eye to the haters.
Okay. I like this. So first tip, definitely don't worry that much about narcissism. Just sort of realize that, well, this is your thing, right? And just focus on helping other people instead of what you want. Then number 2, don't worry about being polarizing, right? Really love that, because, I think there was a Steve Jobs quote, which I really loved. He said, if you want everyone to like you, sell ice cream.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's absolutely.
I don't like ice cream, so I'm one of those people on the
wow
not like side. Yeah.
Maybe even ice cream's polarizing. That's tough.
Everything is polarizing.
Nice wisdom. And then, okay, so here's another thing, I guess we're just gonna be talking about the things that I struggle with, because I'm just gonna bring them all out. So, so one thing that I guess I struggle with is, yes, so I struggle, well, sort of exactly what you're saying when you talk about sort of being fake, right? This feeling of, okay, I need to talk about this on on Twitter, and then this on my website, and then this on my podcast, and sort of bring it all together is just so difficult. So sort of explain, I guess fake is the wrong word. I guess a better way of phrasing it is consistent, right? Being consistent across all these platforms. So sort of explain why the brand archetypes are really great for that. And then also explain how one can sort of use that brand archetype as a framework to sort of bring it together.
Right. So when you're trying to pull the different things together, you want to have congruency. I can call it congruency over consistency. Consistency is more doing the same actions over and over again. Congruency is when I look at this piece and this piece and this piece, they all fit together. They make sense together. And, if you're doing Twitter versus LinkedIn versus Instagram versus Facebook, there's going to be different parts that you're going to showcase because there's different dimensions that you have to use for those different platforms. But if I look at it, the through line of the message, the through line of your archetype is going to be present in all those things. And so it makes sense, even though you're presenting, because, Twitter, I have to be talking about things this way. LinkedIn, I have to talk about things this way. Instagram, I have to show more of the personality side of me, right? But when you put all those pieces together, you're like, oh, I see all the dimensions and they make sense based on that through line. And that's where the archetyping really comes into play, because you can showcase it in lots of different ways, but the basis of it, that foundation is still true to who you are. And it is the foundation of everything that you're putting out there when it is in those different aspects that you're going after.
Makes sense. And you don't have to, it's a lot about effort, right? One of the things that I see is like, it takes very little effort to be natural, right? You just are, and you just do the first thing that comes to you. But applying that sort of social filter is really difficult. And I guess that's the next thing that I'm worried about is, okay, what I've been doing essentially throughout my whole life is I've been just, again, artist, passion projects, whatever's on my mind, I'll say, and it doesn't really have that much congruency, as you say. So how exactly does one sort of, in this world where it's so complex, how does one sort of, I guess, filter themselves down to this one social identity, this one social, one could even call it a mask that, and refuse to talk about all the things that are outside of that one brand archetype, that one identity?
Well, with archetyping, you're not necessarily 100% subscribed to one thing. Like you may have one dominant, you may have two dominants that are pretty equal, or even three. So you need to figure out how to pull those things together. So again, you create that congruency between everything and inconsistency in your messaging. So when we're looking at that, we will have different language that we use. There's going to be potentially buzzwords that fit with your brand. So like with Rebel, I'm disrupting, right? I'm disrupting the way that you think. I'm not disrupting for the sake of disrupting. I'm disrupting to help you to see the world in a different way, right? The magician, transformation is a big word with that. With innocent, it would be simplicity, right? So you look at these words that actually support it, and you start to make that part of your verbiage, right? Because there's a million ways you can explain something. So you can choose to explain it within your archetype, or you can choose to just keep throwing spaghetti against the wall, having a different way of saying it every single time, and then you're confusing to the marketplace. So when you figure out what your archetype is, dig into those things that actually represent it. Look at, how you are described as interacting with the world. Make sure that is consistent with how you feel, right? Make sure it's congruent. And if you have those multiple ones, how do you pull those together so it makes sense? And figure out how to weave those things together so that when you're putting the three of them out there, for example, you aren't confusing. It doesn't feel like you're a rebel with an innocent, which is very polarizing, right? Those are polar opposites of each other, and they don't usually end up fitting together. So, but if you are those two things, how are you going to make it so that it makes sense and you don't have people going like, does this person not understand who they are? Do they have some issues? Are they trying to figure themselves out? Are they a flake? All these labels that people say when they don't understand who you are in the world.
That's really interesting. I mean, I'm definitely not sure personally which one I would be. I guess I'm a bit of an explorer. I don't know, but I think that's one of the difficulties, like first, the huge difficulty is, finding the archetype and sticking with it. But then we could go on to the next one, which I think is the next problem that people experience is, okay, so now that you have your archetype, now that you have your brand, I know you work on this a ton. How do you market it? right? What exactly do you do to take this brand archetype and to market it, filter it into, yes, social channels, websites, speaking, all of these things?
So it's going to influence the way you look on camera. Like if you see me, I'm pretty much always in black. I have dark jewelry. I have like spiky earrings. Oftentimes I'm in a black leather dress as well, but it's really hot in Nicaragua right now. So I opted for a different option. But your look will start to be represented by that archetype. The way that you speak as well, that's a big part of it, is figuring out what your tone of voice is in the world. If you're someone who doesn't have a filter and you just spew exactly what you think without even thinking about it, you're probably not a caregiver. You're not one of those people who's sugarcoating, right? And when you try to sugarcoat, people are like, "Oh, that doesn't feel right." So figuring out what that tone of voice is that is true to you. And also the look of your logo and your content as well. It has to fit with that archetype as well. If I was sitting with a whole bunch of teddy bears behind me and rainbows and unicorns, that would be confusing to my archetype, right? Because that is very inconsistent with the rebel. So there's lots of different pieces that can represent it. So you want to dig into that and understand what those things are and pick the pieces that work for you and make sure that you do keep that consistency as well.
I see. So a lot of it has to deal with trust, right? So when you subscribe to this archetype, whatever archetype it is, people trust that the way that you are is the way that you present yourself is exactly how you are. But if you had teddy bears and unicorns behind you, then they would have to do a little extra thinking, a little extra deliberating, and then it throws off the innate trust that's given by the archetype. Interesting.
Correct. So if someone sees you at a coffee shop and observes you in your natural environment with your friends, and then they walk by your house and observe you, and then they have a sales meeting with you, and then they see you on a podcast, I shouldn't be seeing 4 different people there. Right? There should be that consistency in how you're interacting, how you're presenting yourself. So, and that's when you're actually leaning into who the real you is. If you're having to change who you are in those different situations, you're probably not being true to who you are. You're probably not being true to your archetype. And that's, again, where that mistrust comes in. Because if we are consistent, if we are clear in who we are, then that trust really does start to build with our audiences quite easily.
Wow. And you have to, I love that. You put it down to the detail. So explain to me why you wear, black with the earrings and all of these things. What is that has to do with Rebel?
Yeah. And that's just honestly always been my style, right? I've always, like, before I even recognized that was my archetype, that was always my style. Like, people are like, "Oh, you should be wearing like baby pink." And I'm like, bleh, I would never wear baby pink. Right. So my personal style always played into that. The way that I talk played into that. So I fit very, very cleanly into the rebel archetype just because of who I am. Whereas some people have that ability to float between multiple, and they have maybe 3 or 4 that are on that same level. So you do have to dig into that to figure out how you fit. But you'll start to notice once you understand the archetype more, you'll be like, "Oh yeah, I totally do that." And you may not acknowledge that the first time you read about your archetype, but as you start observing yourself, then you start to realize how deep into that archetype you actually are. And the archetypes aren't there to just try and box you in. These are consistent throughout time. These are personalities that we see in story. We see them in mythology, as I mentioned. We see them across culture. So it's not this thing that was crafted just to like box you in and try and fit you and make you understandable. This is part of human nature where the archetypes fit in.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point that you made earlier, which is that archetypes emanate from you. You don't necessarily choose the archetype, right? Yeah. You're just when you're looking through the 12 archetypes, and I definitely also do want to check out the 8 or the 12. You said there were 60 archetypes, like there were sub archetypes. Okay,
yeah,
definitely.
So there's the 12 main ones, and then each of them have sub archetypes, and the main one is actually one of the sub archetypes. So as you dig deeper into those, so say if you're an innocent, you may not be purely innocent. You may actually be more the child or the angel. And so you need to look into what those actually are and figure out which part of those archetype makes the most sense within each of the big ones that you would potentially fit into.
Interesting. Yes, I'm definitely going to ask you about that. And we're definitely going to figure that out at the end, and I'll put in the description and all those things. But yeah, I think it's really interesting that, that stuff all emanates from you. Like there's really no way to be like, okay, I really want to be a lover or I really, really want to be an explorer. It just kind of emanates from you. And that's why, right? Because they're archetypes and they're so natural.
Yeah. But sometimes people will play into things. Like one of my friends, I was watching her speak and I was like, you realize you play the fool often, even though that's not your archetype. And I was like, why do you think you do that? And she's like, well, it's kind of my protective mechanism. Because if I play the fool or I play the innocent, then people kind of underestimate me. And then when I come forth with my knowledge, then they're blown away. Instead of just coming forth with her knowledge and standing in her power, she still has maintained this childlike part of her, and also the jester part of her, where she's just like, haha, being a little bit flaky about things. And that's a protective mechanism. And now she's like, I'm ready to step into my rebel, because that's really what I am, but I always hide it behind these other things. And I think we go through these different phases in our life where we aren't ready to own exactly who we are, right?
Yeah.
It might be because we have a family that's overbearing, or part of a culture that says you can't. And like within my own upbringing, I was told, you're a girl, you can't do that. I'm like, I'm a human being. Why can't I do that? Right. So there was always this cage on me in every situation that I wasn't supposed to do that because I was XYZ. And so I did stay kind of caged in those things and played that role until I was like, this is stupid. I just need to be exactly who I am, and started to step into that power. And sometimes that comes with maturity. Sometimes that comes with education. Sometimes that comes with just developing your confidence. But there is a bit of an evolution as to which of those archetypes you will actually show it. And as you mentioned at the beginning, you will see yourself in all the different archetypes, right? And you'll see yourself playing different roles in those archetypes depending on the situation. But when you start to own it, and if you're developing out your personal brand, you do need to own which of the archetypes you are and live in those. And the more you live in them, what I find is the more people's confidence starts to increase, because they understand who they are and what they represent to the world and how they should be interacting.
How annoying is that? Like that's so annoying. Because it's so great to pull from all these different identities. Like I looked at them and I was like, I really like about 7 of them out of the 12. And I think one of the biggest things that people struggle with, especially my age, right? I'm 20, and the whole point of being anywhere from 15 to 30, and probably even after, is who am I? What is my identity? And it's so annoying to call off or to push away some of these identities that are actually part of me. Right? Like to some degree, I am a child. To some degree, I am innocent. Right? One of the things that Picasso said, which blew me away, is every artist is a child. No, he said every child is an artist. And I flipped it around and I said every artist is a child, because you're just pursuing the passions that come to you, and you're living in the present moment. You're not really worried about money, all of these things. And I realized that all of these archetypes are part of me, and it feels so constricting to pick one of these. But I guess that's one of the things you have to do as you grow up.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you can be picking it based on where you're presenting as well, right? So if you're going onto LinkedIn, you're probably not going to be playing into the child side of you, right? Because that's a business platform. So they don't want people who are naive and erratic and all that kind of stuff. So you could be using the different archetypes that make sense to you in different situations. And until you're confident in what those actually are, and you are in that age of experimentation, right? Once you get older and you've had more experiences and you're like, ooh, I really like this and I really don't like that. That's where you start to be able to almost pigeonhole yourself more into those archetypes. But there is that fluidity in youth that is going to allow you to play with those different things. And your job right now is to try on different things and see what fits with you. And you're going to do that probably for the next decade. And that's a beautiful phase to be in. And then you start to get that increased depth. You start to have different realizations in the world, just about how things work, how you work. And then that will evolve. And so know that you have that ability to be fluid as well in your youth with this stuff.
Yeah, well, that was the thing that really changed me. Actually, I saw that this morning. It was, you don't know what career, it was about careers. They're like, you don't know which career is the best for you until you try it out. and you don't know which major it is best for you until you try it out. And I'm in complete agreement, right? Just definitely try out all of the different hats. And well, that's a great recommendation. Whichever hat you like best as you go into it. Don't plan that hat or like sort of imagine, okay, what if I was a child for a month? No, just be a child for a month, right? And see what happens. So I definitely love that. And definitely, as we're sort of getting to the end here, definitely sort of take us through any advice that you have for people that are trying to figure out their archetype, trying to figure out their brand archetype, or just trying to figure out their identity itself.
Honestly, just pay attention to how you feel about things, because we have this internal intuition that allows us to look at things from a perspective that makes sense for us, right? And if you're trying to fight it, you're going to have a way longer and way harder process than if you just go, you know what, this feels right. Like, pay attention to your gut. If you get the icks about something, it's probably not right for you. But when something gets you really excited or makes you feel really calm and in your element, those are the paths that you want to really chase. And what if you have those external expectations on you, it can be hard to pay attention to that intuition because you've got all these shoulds coming at you. But if you can just live in yourself, physically feel what is right and what is wrong, that will help to take you on paths much faster than trying to listen to all the external advice or trying to fit into a box that you think you should be in.
God, said like a true rebel, honestly. Because that's the thing, you're talking about, it's energy, right? So, your energy, your motivation, your passion, all that stuff comes from within you. It doesn't come from your cognitive shoulds or, the financials. None of it comes from that. So I would completely agree that your energy, follow your energy. Where's your energy taking you? Does it want you to be more like a child, or does it want you to be something else? And man, follow this rebel. She's pretty great.
Thank you, Nick.
So tell everybody, Angela Mulrooney, this was great. Tell everybody where they could find you, and yeah.
Perfect. So if you want to check out my website, it's unleashinginfluence.com. On the first page, the homepage, there's actually take a quiz. So you can actually go on there and find out what your main archetype actually is. And if you want to set up a call after the fact to dig into that, I'm always happy to do that and give you 30 minutes of my time to discover what you need to discover. Ask me anything that you want, and I'll happily give you my time.
I cannot believe that you waited till the end of the episode to tell people that they could take a quiz on this. Oh my. I'm putting that into the intro. So, people will already know about that by now. So yeah, Angela, thank you for coming on. This has been great.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Nick Lugo Show with Angela Mulrooney. To support this podcast, please give me a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And so I'll leave you with a quote by, Carl Jung himself. Only one who has risked the fight with the dragon and is not overcome by it wins the hoard, the treasure hard to attain. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you next time.